In update 0.105, Sprocket rebalanced guns, and today we're going to take a little bit of a look into that rebalancing, as well as give you guys a whole bunch of tips on how to improve your gun design. And we're better to start than with your gun mount selection. So gun mounts each have slight advantage and disadvantage depending on which properties they retain here in the gun mount settings. So all guns get mounts get elevation here, with a torque that goes up to 6.0 kilonewtons, which can give you a certain elevation rate. Our elevation rate is also dependent on the mass and balance of the gun, which we'll get into a little bit. Other than that, it can have azimuth rotation, which this mantlet, which is the Panther one, does not support. But you can also have a armor point, where you can increase the armor of the gun mantlet itself. And that is not the frontal plate that actually turns with the gun, but the mount of it itself. However, this mount is currently just a half sphere, or a half cylinder. And you can, if you make it like this, you can completely just forget about the armor protection here on the turret itself, this frontal plate, because it is already protected by a 200mm frontal mantlet that does not add or subtract any weight or space when you bring it up to 200mm, which is a little bit of a build optimization, which you can do right here to make your build more protected while saving a little bit of weight. That's it. We're going to go on to the azimuth rotation, which of course this mantlet doesn't have, but other mantlets do have. But that azimuth rotation is only relevant when you're mounted on the hull, because azimuth rotation is the horizontal rotation of the cannon. As you can see here, the cannon can turn despite being mounted to the hull. And that is what azimuth does. Azimuth has the exact same mass, it will always retain a little bit of a higher azimuth rate than elevation does. That's that. We're gonna move the turret back, the gun back into the turret. We're gonna talk a little bit about gun depression. So gun depression, of course, can be very useful when you're rolling up a hill. And I can actually advise you guys to actually just go with whatever the original tank designers of a lot of tanks did, and go with the 10 degrees of gun depression, or maybe even more, because there can actually be quite a lot of hills that you can use to your advantage to hide your hole behind if you have good gun depression. And gun depression you get by either elevating the turret more, so you can see here this red line, that is the length check for gun depression. And if you raise the roof to make more space for that line, you can in fact get more gun depression. So here you can see I can go all the way up to 32. What you can also do is shorten the shell length value, which will shorten the back end of the gun, which will lead to a shorter check. However, getting a larger shell length, of course, means more velocity, which means more penetration. I can actually advise you guys to go with a longer shell length before going for a larger caliber, because larger calibers often run into balance issues with the gun, not more than just weight issues. Because again, that elevation rate is dependent on both the mass and balance of the gun. And what do I mean with balance? So you might actually notice this tiny little yellow line that's popped up here between the red and the green lines, and it is exactly on its converging point. That is a good balance of gun. If I were to increase the length of the barrel, you can see the line goes forward because the gun becomes more front heavy. Meaning that if I go and check right now, it's going to be 7.7, but if I increase the length of the gun, we're going to go down to 6.0 elevation, because the engine is not powerful enough to lift the front heavy cannon. And later on, I hope that this little part right here will offer a counterweight, so making the barrel more heavy, and not having it at all would make the barrel more rear heavy. But right now, mantlets have lost any of their effects because they're still working on rebalancing those. So maybe they will become useful later, but for now, you don't have to worry about putting them on at all or not, because they are simply aesthetic. That said, let's actually look about the stats of the gun itself. So you have muzzle velocity, of course, that is the maximum speed of the gun. However, certain eras have a limit on muzzle velocity. Like the early war period, or even the World War I period, or interwar periods, they all have low velocity guns, so they can not always hit the maximum velocity. And that is something to keep in mind. Sometimes if you can increase your muzzle velocity and barrel length all you want, but will not go above a certain amount, then you know you have hit the limit for muzzle velocity. Armor penetration is a direct result from your caliber multiplied by your velocity. So increasing your caliber will of course increase it, but it will only by a certain amount if you don't increase the barrel length. Because barrel length here is a 95% burn off rate. So you'll get 95% of your maximum penetration manageable by this caliber and this shell length if you make your barrel length as what is advertised here. So if I go to a 5.39 millimeters, I can see it is 184 millimeters, and if I put it back down, the amount of penetration you lose is quite significant. Well, if you go up to the maximum, it is much less. You're only going up to 190. So yeah, you really don't gain much there. You only get like a 5 millimeter. So if you go down, you'll lose a lot more. So you kind of want to go up to mostly that length. You kind of want to be above 75% burn off, if possible. But again, on earlier eras, that is not always possible. And that is how you get the best amount of penetration. You also have dispersion, of course, making a longer barrel gives you less dispersion. And yeah, that is really a quite straightforward thing. And lastly, we can talk about barrel thickness. If you want to rebalance the gun forward without increasing its length, you can use the thickness stat to make it more frontal heavy. You can see right here I've managed to raise the gun balance to in front of the balance point from behind the balance point simply by increasing the thickness of the base part right here. And that is really all there is to cannons. Cannons are really quite simple once you know how all the stats work. And yeah, let's go on to the ammo actually and the reloads. Because you always have this base reload time stated in your tab right here. But this reload time is based assuming two things. So first up, there has to be ammo in the turret, or whatever the place is where the gun is as well. So if the gun is turret mounted, you want to have ammo in the turret. If the gun is hull mounted, you want to have ammo in the hull. That is something very important to remember. Of course, if you don't put the ammo in the right spot, you're gonna have a reload penalty. So it says loading from the same one is 1.5 times faster, meaning you lose 33% reload time speed. So increasing the reload by 1.5 if you put it in the wrong compartment. Crew is also a very large factor here. You want to have your loader always functioning at 100% efficiency. And you only get that if he is working on a singular task and not on two tasks. You can see here you will lose a significant amount of efficiency. He gets the maximum allocated space, and the commander has to do the same thing. Again, only one thing to do, and his maximum space. Because if the commander is doing multiple things, or is having a smaller space, it's going to give a debuff to all other crew members, meaning they will be less efficient at their jobs. So that is how you get the maximum reload, maximum penetration, and maximum firepower out of your guns. There's only two other stats here to talk about, which are the damage and fragments. So fragments is basically how much spalling it's creating on the inside. So how likely it is to affect everything that's in the tank basically. And damage just directly subtracts from the health pool from the enemy tank. However, how things work right now, it is very, very unlikely for you to not one-shot a tank, even with just solid AP shells, if they're doing a reasonable amount of damage. So if they're like, let's say above 75 millimeters for the gun, you're very, very likely to one-shot. The only guns where fragmentation really matters is on the really small dinky like 30 millimeter guns that have a maximum barrel length and maximum velocity. The actual like real guns out of in this game basically. And those will be able to disable certain modules based on their fragmentation. but it's all really inconsistent because there's like no real way of defining where all the components are right now. So you don't really have to worry about those too much. As long as your caliber is decent and you can penetrate the enemy, you will be able to one-shot them most of the time. That's it. That's all the info I got on cannons. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. I'll catch you all in the next one.